Most traffic stops do not escalate because someone is guilty. They escalate because someone talks. That statement makes people uncomfortable, especially people who were raised to believe that cooperation solves everything, that if you're polite and transparent and just explain yourself, the officer will see you're a good person and send you on your way. I understand that instinct. I see it every week in court. Good people with clean records who genuinely believed that if they just clarified things, everything would settle down. And then I'm standing next to them at arraignment, reviewing body camera footage where the entire case was built not on contraband, not on some dramatic criminal conduct, but on their own mouth running just a little too long. I have reviewed hundreds of body camera videos. I've read transcripts where a routine speeding stop slowly turned into a DUI investigation, then a search, then a charge. I've cross-examined officers in suppression hearings where the justification for expanding a stop hinged on one ambiguous sentence a driver casually offered. And here's what I can tell you. The law gives you more power than you think, but it only works if you know how to use it calmly and precisely. There is one anchor phrase that changes the trajectory of a stop more than anything else I've seen. It's not confrontational. It's not aggressive. It's not some viral gotcha line designed to embarrass an officer on YouTube. It's calm, controlled, and legally surgical. The phrase is this: am I being detained or am I free to leave? Say it slowly in your mind. Am I being detained or am I free to leave? Everything I'm about to explain revolves around that line. Picture a typical scenario. You're driving home. Maybe you rolled slightly over the speed limit. Maybe your tail light is out and you didn't know. You see the lights behind you. Your heart rate spikes immediately. Your hands feel slightly heavier on the steering wheel. That's not weakness. That's biology. Adrenaline floods your system. Your body prepares for confrontation, even if you intellectually know this is just a traffic stop. Your voice may sound different than you expect. Your thoughts race. This physiological response is part of why people talk too much. Stress makes us fill silence. The officer approaches. They ask the routine question, "Do you know why I stopped you?" Now this is the part most people misunderstand. That question is not casual conversation. It is a fishing expedition. If you say, "Yeah, I was probably going a little fast," you've just admitted speeding. If you say, "I was trying to get home quickly," that becomes evidence of intent. If you say, "I didn't see the sign," you've acknowledged the sign existed and you missed it. Every variation is usable. So you respond politely. You provide your license and registration. You comply with lawful requests. You do not argue roadside. And at some point, if the officer's questions drift away from the reason for the stop, if they begin probing into where you're coming from, where you're going, whether there's anything illegal in the car, whether you mind if they take a quick look, this is where it turns. This is where the stop either remains a 2-minute citation or expands into a 20-minute investigation. And this is where the phrase matters. Am I being detained or am I free to leave? That question forces clarity. Under the Fourth Amendment, a traffic stop is a seizure. It is lawful only for the duration necessary to address the reason for the stop and attend to related safety concerns. The Supreme Court has been clear that officers cannot extend a stop beyond its mission without reasonable suspicion of additional criminal activity. That sounds abstract, but in practice it means this: they can write the ticket. They can check your license. They can run the plate. They can handle the traffic matter. What they cannot do is prolong the stop to go on a generalized fishing expedition unless they can articulate specific facts suggesting something else is going on. Here's where this gets complicated. Officers are trained to develop those articulable facts: nervousness, inconsistent travel plans, air fresheners, avoiding eye contact, too much eye contact, shaking hands, a delayed response. You see the pattern. Many of these indicators are simply human stress responses, especially when red and blue lights are flashing behind you. When you calmly say, "Am I being detained or am I free to leave?" you are not challenging authority. You are asking for the legal status of the encounter. If the purpose of the stop is complete and they lack reasonable suspicion, the law says you should be free to go. If they say you are being detained, now they must justify that detention later in court. This is the trap most people fall into. They never create the moment of clarity. They stay in conversational mode. They answer more questions. They consent to small things. Sure, you can take a look. No, I don't mind. They assume that refusing would make them look guilty. Let me be honest with you. Consenting to a search makes you look compliant, not innocent. And if something is found, your consent eliminates one of the strongest defenses I can raise in court. I represented a client once, clean record, mid-30s, professional job, who was stopped for a lane violation. The officer returned his documents but didn't explicitly say he was free to go. Instead, he pivoted. Hey, before you leave, do you mind if I ask you a couple more questions? My client stayed. He answered. He grew increasingly nervous. The officer later testified that his nervousness seemed abnormal. Eventually, the officer asked for consent to search. My client agreed because he didn't want to seem difficult. They found a small amount of controlled substances in a backpack that wasn't even his. The entire case hinged on whether the continued interaction was consensual or an unlawful extension. If, at the moment his documents were returned, he had asked, "Am I being detained or am I free to leave?" we would have forced the issue right there. This is where it turns from theory into strategy. The phrase does three things simultaneously. It signals that you understand the distinction between detention and a consensual encounter. It prevents the officer from casually sliding into prolonged questioning without acknowledging the legal basis. And it creates a clear point in time that can be reviewed later on body camera footage. Now, this is the part most people misunderstand. Asking that question may not make the officer smile. It may not create warmth. It may create tension. The hard truth is that asserting rights sometimes makes officers more formal, less friendly, occasionally even irritated. They are human beings. Some will interpret it as a sign you've watched too many videos. Some will immediately shift tone. But irritation is not probable cause. The Constitution does not require you to be likable. It requires the government to be lawful. Here's where nuance matters. If the officer says you are being detained, the next line is not an argument. It is calm silence, or if questioning continues beyond identifying information, a measured invocation. I'm going to remain silent. Those words are powerful, not hostile, not shouted, simply stated. People sabotage themselves because silence feels awkward. Officers understand that. Silence creates psychological pressure. Humans are wired to resolve tension in conversation. So the officer might say, "Look, if you've got nothing to hide, this will only take a second." That sentence has unraveled more defenses than any sophisticated interrogation technique. It reframes compliance as innocence and refusal as suspicion. But legally, innocence and compliance are not synonyms. This is where the gray area lives. Officers can ask questions. You can answer voluntarily. The Constitution protects against compelled self-incrimination and unreasonable searches, not against uncomfortable moments. So you must be comfortable being uncomfortable. Body language matters more than people realize. Keep your hands visible. Move slowly. Avoid sudden gestures. Maintain a neutral tone, not sarcastic, not trembling if you can help it. If your voice shakes, that's fine. Adrenaline does that, but don't let your words wander. Short answers to required questions. Then, if it continues, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Repeat it if necessary, calmly, like a metronome. There are exceptions. If the officer develops reasonable suspicion, specific, articulable facts suggesting criminal activity, they can extend the stop briefly to investigate. If they smell marijuana, see contraband in plain view, observe signs of impairment, the analysis changes. If you're on probation with search conditions, different rules apply. If there is a warrant, the encounter escalates lawfully. This phrase is not magic. It does not override facts. It forces clarity where clarity is required. And sometimes, let me be honest, the stop will not end in 2 minutes. Sometimes the officer will say, "You're being detained," and you will sit there longer than you'd like. This is where discipline matters. Because the moment you become argumentative, the moment your tone sharpens, the moment you say something like, "This is harassment," you give them emotional fuel. Emotional escalation can lead to claims of disorderly conduct, obstruction, or simply a deteriorating interaction that could have remained controlled. This is the psychology of officers that few people talk about realistically. Most officers are trained to look for deception cues. They are trained to maintain command presence. When someone calmly asserts a right without aggression, it forces a mental recalibration. You are not hostile. You are not submissive. You are composed. That composure often shortens the interaction because there is no conversational thread to pull. Contrast that with the driver who nervously over-explains. I'm coming from my friend's house. We were just watching the game. I only had 2 beers, but that was hours ago. I swear I'm fine. Now the officer hears 2 beers. Field sobriety tests begin. What started as a broken taillight morphs into a DUI investigation. This is the trap. You think you're helping yourself. You are expanding the scope. I've stood in courtrooms where officers testified that a driver's statements gave them reasonable suspicion to prolong the stop. And technically, they're right, because the driver provided the facts. Here's where this gets complicated again. There is a social instinct to cooperate fully with authority figures. From childhood, we're conditioned to answer questions from adults, from teachers, from officials. The badge triggers that conditioning. Your brain shifts into compliance mode. Combine that with adrenaline, flashing lights, maybe passengers in the car watching you, and you have the perfect recipe for oversharing. So rehearse the phrase now, not when your heart is pounding. Am I being detained or am I free to leave? Say it in a neutral tone in your head. Imagine the pause afterward. Imagine the officer responding. If they say you're free to leave, you leave. You do not linger. You do not re-engage. You thank them if you want, and you go. If they say you're being detained, you have clarity. Now any further detention must be justified. If charges arise later, your attorney has a defined moment to analyze. We look at the timeline. We review the body cam. We ask, what specific facts justified continued detention at that second? This is how cases are won. Not with dramatic speeches, with timestamps. Let me give you another realistic example. A young woman stopped for expired registration. The officer handled the paperwork, then asked about travel plans. She answered vaguely. He pressed. She hesitated. He later testified that her hesitation, combined with extreme nervousness, led him to call for a K-9 unit. The dog arrived 12 minutes later. Drugs were found. The appellate court ultimately ruled the extension unlawful because there were insufficient specific facts. But she spent months under prosecution before that decision. If she had asked, at the moment the registration issue was resolved, am I being detained or am I free to leave? The officer would have been forced either to articulate suspicion or conclude the stop. Now here's the hard truth I promised you. Even if you do everything correctly, even if you assert your rights perfectly, you may still be cited. You may still be inconvenienced. You may still feel tension in the interaction. The Constitution is not a shield against annoyance. It is a framework for legality. Asserting your rights is not about winning a popularity contest roadside. It is about preserving arguments for later, when emotions are gone and facts matter. And here's something else that rarely gets said out loud. Sometimes officers expect pushback. They are prepared for aggression. Calm clarity is disarming in a different way. When you remove emotional energy from the exchange, the stop often collapses back to its original purpose. But you must avoid the temptation to add commentary. Do not lecture about the Fourth Amendment. Do not say, I know my rights. That phrase alone often changes tone for the worse. You don't need to declare knowledge. You demonstrate it by precision. Am I being detained or am I free to leave? There is power in repetition without hostility. If they ignore the question and continue asking investigatory questions unrelated to the stop, repeat it. If they deflect, why, are you in a hurry? Repeat it, calmly, not louder, not sarcastic, just steady. This steadiness matters because body camera footage captures tone as much as words. Judges watch demeanor. Jurors watch demeanor. The calm person asserting rights appears credible. The agitated person arguing roadside appears reactive, even if legally correct. Now, this is the part most people never consider. The goal is not to beat the officer. The goal is to control the scope of the encounter. Control is quiet. Control is disciplined. Control is knowing when to stop talking. Adrenaline will tempt you to fill space. Silence will feel like weakness. It is not. In legal settings, silence is often strength. If you take nothing else from this, understand that most criminal cases born from traffic stops begin with voluntary expansion, voluntary statements, voluntary consent, Voluntary continuation of conversation after the legal basis for detention has ended, and all of that can be slowed down with one sentence. Am I being detained, or am I free to leave? Rehearse it until it feels natural. Practice saying it in a calm tone while standing in your kitchen. Imagine flashing lights and still keeping your voice steady. Because under stress, you will not rise to your ideals. You will fall to your training. If you have never practiced asserting your rights calmly, adrenaline will make the decision for you. This is not about being anti-police. It is about understanding that the system runs on procedure. Officers gather evidence. Prosecutors evaluate charges. Defense attorneys challenge legality. Judges review standards. Each part of that system assumes citizens may assert rights. It is built into the design. So, the next time you see those lights in your rearview mirror, remember that the stop has a legal boundary. Remember that conversation is not neutral. Remember that ambiguity benefits the government, not you. And remember the phrase that forces clarity. Am I being detained, or am I free to leave? Say it without anger. Say it without fear. Say it until it becomes automatic. Because in that moment, when your pulse is elevated and your thoughts are racing, clarity will be your greatest ally. And that simple question may be the difference between a citation that ends in minutes and a case that follows you for months.